Hello F11 members and welcome to the Fundamentals of Post-Production video tutorials for issue 50, March 2016. Come with me, if you will, to Australia, to Karijini National Park. And I'm down in a gorge again. It's early morning, although not so early that the sun isn't up. I finished my shoot down in this gorge with this scene here with lovely reflections and a great sky. But as always in that situation in Australia, quite a contrasty lighting situation to deal with. And what you're looking at on the screen here is the same essential image, but I've processed it in two different ways to handle the contrast. On the left here, this one here, we have an image where I've used Lightroom's photo merge capability, exposure merging capability, to create a DNG image which has handled the contrast quite well. And with a little bit of tweaking, I produced this picture. But one thing I've noticed with these kind of, with Lightroom's exposure merging is that if I go in really tight on this picture here and just come in on quite a high magnification and move you over to so you can see what I'm talking about, bring the navigator in there, go up a bit larger, oh, wrong one. I'm all over the shop this morning. Okay, now I've gone into 200% magnification on the image on the left there. And in the shadows there, you can see it's quite noisy. Obviously at 200%, that's over magnified. But 100% magnification, you can see that in the shadows, the exposure merging has created quite a noisy image that in the shadows, which obviously is not something to be desired, and I've noticed this before. So what I've done is I've then done the exposure merging here, the image on the right, come back to normal magnification there, and obviously at this magnification they look virtually identical. But if I then zoom in to 100% magnification on this picture here, and go to the shadows area over here in particular, you can see much cleaner image here in these shadow areas and the darker areas there. Quite significant. I'm going to go back to this one again, magnify it up so we can see it side by side, and move the area over here. And I hope that you can see the difference there, even on a relatively small video resolution display. So clearly merging manually seems to deliver the better quality. So what I'm going to do now is go back and utilize into Lightroom and start from scratch. Let's do away for now with this HDR version of that picture. And we're going to start from scratch, and I'm going to talk you through the process of merging the exposures to produce this picture. So I'm now in Lightroom, and what I have here in front of me are the RAWs that I've out of the camera. And as you can see, I did quite a range of bracketed exposures here to handle the high contrast situation. Probably way more than I needed to, actually. This is here, this is the Lightroom's photo merge using these 5 exposures here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as I've already demonstrated, noticed noise problems with that. So what I'm going to do now is take just these 2 exposures here, this one, and make various versions of them and then merge them to optimize the tonal range in the picture. So let's start with this image here. and I'm going to go into Develop Module and Reset, because it's still got some of the adjustments that I did first time around. So starting from scratch, and this is the raw file straight out of the camera, no adjustments made at all. First thing I'm going to do is make a version of this which is optimized for the darker areas of the picture. I'm going to ignore all this burnt out detail up the top and look at just this darker area of the picture here, the rocks on the left and here on the right. Then I'm going to make a second version of the same image, which is really concentrating on the water here, area of the water, and this bit of vegetation around here. And then we'll move on to working on the other image. As always, with this post-production game, thinking through what you're going to do before you do it is so crucial. It's not just about tinkering aimlessly. So, first thing I'm going to do is adjust the shadows on this picture here to bring up the detail down in here in the darker part of the image, a bit more I think, up to around about plus 45 on the shadows there. I'm now going to just add a little bit of vibrance to that, and I'll put in about 16 there, and I'll sharpen the picture as usual using Lightroom's default here. Click on that Sharpen Scenic, and that's it. I'm actually quite happy with that part of the image, just the darker part of the image. I'm now going to export that and come back to it in Photoshop. So I'll just, to save time, I'll just do that and pick up with you in a second. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is look at the image now, and I'm looking now at this sort of the medium tones in the picture, and I'm now going to make a version of this image which has been optimized just for the mid-range tones in the picture here in the water and in the sort of banks of the river beyond. It was a really beautiful morning there. It's taking me back now just looking at the picture. Okay, so the next thing I do is come back to the shadows and take that, double click on that cursor, and it takes the shadow recovery slider back to 0. But now I want to look at all this bright area down here. There is tonal information there, as is indicated if I hover my cursor over this bright area and look at the percentage values that appear in the histogram. Under the histogram, I can see there is detail, but I want it to be, I want more detail, I want more density there, so I'm going to bring the highlights right back to maximum there. And it's had the effect of bringing in more detail here, particularly in the bright areas of the water. I'm now going to use the point curve to just darken that down a bit. Now what I'm looking at, and this is the kind of density that I want, the brightness in other words, of this area of the image, the green on the riverbanks and the reflections in the water. I'm ignoring this dark area bottom left and just over here, extreme right. I'm ignoring this bright area of rocks here, top of the frame, and the sky. And I'm now going to export that image to be opened up in Photoshop later and merged. So I'm going to do that and come right back to you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is go back into library mode here, and I'm going to come to this image here, which is a darker exposure. And if I go into develop mode again here and reset the image, just when my computer's caught up with me. Okay, click on reset, that takes it back to the raw, straight out of the image, out of the camera, no adjustments made. Okay, so what I'm going to do first of all is make a version of this which has been optimized for the sky here. Now you can see the sky, quite a contrasty situation, almost burning out up there, but not quite. I've picked this exposure so that I've retained detail in that sky, but still it appears a bit too bright, and so I want to optimize that. First thing I'm going to do is come down here to the highlights and pull them back to around about there. Just doing this visually, just looking at that, that's giving me a nice kind of density to the sky, but I'm now just going to adjust the white clipping a touch because the whites look a little bit dingy there in the sky. So if I move the white to the white slider to the right to about there, I'm still not clipping any information, and it's had the effect of just cleaning up the sky there. I now want to actually boost the shadows where we're going to merge the image here. I think I'm going to put maximum shadow recovery on here to bring in detail here, just so that when I'm merging this with the other exposures, I've got some detail here in the crossover area. Okay, and at that point I would now add my sharpening, of course, there using Lightroom's default, and I'm going to add just a touch of vibrance again about 16 there, and I'm now going to export that image. Okay, so let's go with that, and I'll come back to you again. So the next thing I'm going to do now is look at the fourth version, or the fourth export to be merged, and that's now looking at this area of the image, the bright area on the top left predominantly, and at the moment it's just a bit too dingy, a bit too dark. So what I'm going to do now is bring the highlights back to 0, take the highlight recovery off. I'm going to adjust my white clipping here. Now if I hold down the Alt button on my keyboard and move this to the right, ignore the clipping that's taking place in the sky. I just want to smarten up the whites just in the area of here, just in this area to the left of the image. And I'm going to go plus 60 on my white clipping there. I'm going to use the point curve to add just a touch of brightness to the picture, and there we go. Ignore the sky, just look at this area on the left, and that has the right kind of contrast and brightness for me now. So I'm going to export that, and then I'll have all 4 images open in Photoshop and ready to merge. So I'll pick up with you in a second on that. So what I have now is the 4 versions of this image all open in Photoshop and ready to be merged. Just to recap on what we're doing here, I have the brightest image optimized for the shadow areas here, predominantly in the rock bottom left, and just this bit over to the right as well. I then have this area, this image here, bottom right, which has been optimized for the water and the green along the vegetation along the riverbank here. I then have this image here, which has been optimized predominantly for this area of rock in the bright sunlight on the left of the frame, and then I have this image here, which is for the sky. And in part 2 of this, these video tutorials for this edition, we're going to piece them all together. So I'll see you back for that.